What's up, Wizards? It's Dev. Mtg. We're looking at magic. We got some more Throne of Eldraine spoilers. That's good. That's what you come for. So, let me tell you, today, a lot of good stuff. There's the usual spat of a few cards at the beginning of the video that are just kind of normal. Talk about those for the limited environment. We'll have some fun. But towards the end of the video, there's another 4, 5, 6 cards that I think are going to be, like, actually incredibly impactful. Like, there's some butternuts cards today. So we got a lot to talk about. Let's jump in. We'll get warmed up today with Skull Knocker Ogre and Howl's Moving Castle. It's actually Roving Keep. This card's pretty bad, but I love the flavor of it. 7 mana for a 5/7 artifact wall with Defender, and if you pay 7, you can just swing in with it. So you have to pay its casting cost again, and that's like, this is just huge investment. The card's probably pretty bad, but like, the art's cool, flavor's cool, reminds me of anime, I guess, so that's fine. But Skull Knocker Ogre is a little bit more interesting. This is a 4 mana 4/3 ogre. Not the best stats, but not terrible stats either in limited. And when it deals combat damage, or just any damage really, to an opponent, that player discards a card at random. And if they do discard the card, they also get to draw a card, which isn't great, but this is random discard, which is notoriously good and irritating for the opponents. Random discard is just something we don't really see very often anymore, so take note of it, but I don't think the card is very good. Up next, let's take a look at Searing Barrage, which I have more to say about than I initially thought I would, but this is 5 mana, 4 and a red for an instant, and it deals 5 damage to target creature. But if you go Adamant and spend at least 3 red mana to cast it, then it also deals 3 damage to that creature's controller. And I think this is actually an interesting little case study of a card here. Like, this looks pretty bad, probably won't see too much standard play, but imagine if we had it in the last format and we didn't have a card like Fight with Fire, for instance, to take out Lyra Dawnbringers after the board. This card would have seen play in that kind of format. Even with Fight with Fire, this card might have still seen play out of some Grixis and Jeskai sideboards to take down Lyra Dawnbringers post-board, or maybe even in aggro boards to take down Lyra Dawnbringers post-board and still deal damage to the opponent. Just imagine what kind of play this would have been against Lyra, but alas, we don't have Lyra to deal with anymore, so I doubt this sees really any play whatsoever, and I'm not actually sure that it would have, even in a format with Lyra Dawnbringer and no Fight with Fire. This is a very expensive card, but I do think it's an interesting lesson and at least a good thought experiment in, like, no matter how bad a card might look, under the right conditions, it could see play. But again, all that's kind of hot air. The card's not going to see any play. That said, it is really good limited removal, so you got that going for you. We also have 2 commons here today that are so simple I don't even really have to translate them for you. There's Curious Pair, and then there's Weaselback Redcap. It's Wesselback, but Wesselback is just 1 red for a 1/1 goblin, and you can pay a couple of mana and give it +2/+0 till end of turn. Nothing really to write home about. Curious Pair is a little bit more interesting. The spell half of this is just 1 green mana to create a food token at sorcery speed, so that's apparently the going rate on food tokens, 1 mana, sorcery speed. But you can also just cast this as a 2 mana 1/3. Or of course you can get the food token and then later cast the creature half. So I actually don't think this card is terrible. But that said, in standard food decks, if it even tries to be a real deck in standard, I'm not really sure how high up the tier list that deck ends up going. But at the same time, I'm not sure that it actually ends up playing this card. It might be a nice little, like, technically anti-aggro piece in the early game. You get yourself a decent blocker and an artifact that makes 3 life for you. So I can see this brick walling aggro pretty well. I think it's a better card than it looks like at first glance. Now here's an uncommon that I do have to translate. This is Trail of Breadcrumbs, and it's interesting. It's just 1 and a green for an enchantment. And when it ETBs, you create a food token. So you get that right off the top. And whenever you sacrifice a food, you can pay an extra mana. And if you do, look at the top 2 cards of your library. You may reveal a permanent card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Now that is actually really good value for sacking food tokens. It kind of sucks that you have to add an extra mana to it. I really wish it was just whenever you sacrificed a food token. But I guess on the very next turn, you can sacrifice the food token this gave to you, pay the extra mana if you got your land drop, and then it's a really good card advantage. It kind of sucks that this isn't just like a, more Sylvan Library-ish. If you were just able to keep either of the 2 cards, it would be a much better card, but it has to be a permanent that you keep. And that means that you will hit lands more often. You'll be able to hit those key creatures more often. I could see this working, but very often, each new mechanic will get, you know, a 2 or 3 mana enchantment that doesn't do a whole heck of a lot besides work with that mechanic. And very often these aren't very good. And I think that this goes in that category more than it goes into the category that I'm like hype and excited about. I could see maybe doing stuff with this, and I like that it doesn't do nothing. The turn it enters the battlefield, you at least get a food token, and that's something, right? And 2 mana isn't that much to get started, but at the same time, I'm a little apprehensive about this. Now, there's another uncommon that looks really exciting, but I'm actually going to put it in this category because I'm not that excited about it. And that's Sire Kara the Bold. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 red for a 3/3 legendary human knight. And whenever Sire Kara the Bold or an instant or sorcery spell you control deals damage to a player, you exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn, and you can also tap Sire Kara for a damage to any target. Now, this looks really, really good, but I don't like 5 mana 3/3s. I especially don't like 5 mana 3/3s that you're going to have to wait a turn to do something with after they come into the battlefield, you know, especially when they're so susceptible to removal. I mean, I know I'm using the dies to removal argument, but you really want your 5-drops to be more impactful than this in Standard. And in Red, you can play this if you want, but you could also play Sarkhan or Skargan Hellkite. And I just really think there's like way better 5-drops with exactly this mana cost just in red, but if you're mixing any other colors in, there are probably better 5-drops in those colors too. So I hate to be so hard on it. This really looks more like a Brawl commander to me than a standard playable card. Now, I am trashing Sire Kara just a little bit, but I did hold back a good red uncommon to talk about. And this is actually where I think we start the really impactful stuff from today. Here's Claim the Firstborn. I love this art, but I really don't know how they resisted. With this name and with a goblin stealing a baby, I really don't know how they resisted making the goblin look like David Bowie from The Labyrinth. I don't... But they somehow did. You want to err on the side of not infringing copyright. So, Claim the Firstborn is just 1 red mana for a sorcery. 1 red mana. Gain control of target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less until end of turn. Then untap that creature and it gains haste until end of turn. So it's a 1 mana threaten effect. That is so good. And note, by the way, a lot of people have been missing this. You can gain control of your own creature until end of turn if you just want to untap it and give it haste, or either one of those two things. That's quite good when you think about it, but obviously you'll be using this to steal your creatures, your opponent's creatures in aggro decks more often than not, and every now and again you see cards like Threaten and Hijack and, you know, all those kind of cards show up in aggro decks. Just on camera a couple of weeks ago I had somebody steal my Riding Regisaur with a Threaten and finish the game off against me that way, so took the L that day. Threaten is sometimes a really, really good card, and by the way, note that they would have actually been able to steal Riding Regisaur with this card, just for 1 red mana. This is a really, really good investment. And it's amazing how many 3-drops and under in Standard are really, really important. And honestly, especially if you went first in your mono red aggro deck, it really kind of doesn't matter what they played up until turn 3 or 4. You're just going to steal their best creature from them, swing in, and sometimes just finish the game off. Like, this is actually a threaten effect that's really worth playing in mono red. I usually question players who take up deck slots in mono red with threaten effects, but I wouldn't fault anybody playing a 1 mana threaten effect. This looks really powerful. By the way, I would be dumb if I didn't also mention that there are like multiple sacrifice effects in this format. It works well with Priests of the Forgotten Gods and a bunch of other stuff that we're working with right now. So all you got to do is steal a creature for 1 mana and then sacrifice it for value. There's also that, but honestly, I think if you're just playing this card straightforward, the way you're kind of intended to, you know, steal that guy, swing in with it, try to kill you before you kill me, then I think this card is still like just as powerful. You don't need extra interaction or combos or tricks or anything. It just looks like a crazy card. And I'm just talking about Standard, but this is also true of Modern and Legacy. I just want to point that out. This card could see play in multiple formats. But now let's look at an uncommon that probably should have been a rare. This is Greedy Impulse right here. It costs 4 mana, all Dimir hybrid colors, so it's probably easier to cast than you'd think. It's a sorcery, which does dampen things a little bit, but it's still a really nice card. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card in that player's hand or graveyard and exile it. For as long as that card remains exiled, you can cast it, and you can spend mana as though it were any type to cast it. This is very good. The Eldest Reborn is leaving the format, and this card kind of reminds me of the Eldest Reborn, although it's been most compared to Hostage Taker today. Problem is you don't get an extra body off of it or anything, and that kind That kind of sucks. I don't really know if this is as good as a hostage taker, but in some situation it's going to be a lot better. It doesn't affect the board as much. It doesn't necessarily 2-for-1 them the way hostage taker did. And again, that hurts, but you do get the best card out of their hand, especially if you're on the play in a given game. Then this looks like it's going to be really good to get that big, 4, 5, 6 drop play out of their hand. And if the format really does get as mid-range as it looks at present, then this can be a very, very important card for not only getting your opponent's best play in their entire deck out of their hand, the thing their deck is built around, but now you get to play that. You get to play their Nissa or whatever if they didn't skip ahead and play it on turn 3 somehow. You get to play their Nissa now. So that's just... card looks really, really nuts. And you also effectively make them discard a card. And for 4 mana, that's a lot. But you're also exiling the card even if you never play it. That's a lot better than putting it in the graveyard. Note that mono blue or mono black could play this card to great effect, I think. You don't necessarily have to be in Dimir to play it. There's just an awful lot to like about this thing. Just grabbing, I love that it doesn't have to be out of their hand either. You can nab a card out of their graveyard, so if you've removed one of their creatures or planeswalkers or really anything. I love the lack of type restriction on this too. Note that you can grab an important enchantment out of their graveyard, and that's going to be a key play some of the time. So I like a lot about this card, and even though I worry that it doesn't really affect the board for a really high mana cost, or at least not immediately, it doesn't affect the board. I still think that it's probably at least a sideboard card, but I think we might be looking at a card that's way better than we've all initially evaluated it. This could be a sleeper hit. For now, onto a card that I don't like as much as everybody else, and that's Clack Bridge Troll. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 black for an 8/8 trample haste. And when it ETBs, target opponent creates 3/0/1 white goat creature tokens. You see what they're doing here? At the beginning of combat on your turn, any opponent may sacrifice a creature. If a player does, you tap the troll, and then you gain 3 life, and then you draw a card. Now, just to clarify, when I say I don't like this as much as everybody else, I still like the card. Don't think that I'm not a fan of this, but I will say there are some holes in some people's arguments because it seems like this is pretty unanimously liked by the community just in the first few hours that it's been out. The response has been overwhelmingly positive to this card. Now, it's not like my job to burst bubbles or anything, but like one thing everyone's saying is that when you do attack in with it, which you can immediately do because it has haste, and I think that's kind of like the most important part of the entire card. But when you attack in with it, your opponent's going to sacrifice goat number 1, and for the next 3 turns, they're going to sacrifice goats. So they effectively have 3 turns to deal with this, plus any other creatures that they might have out that they can sacrifice. But people are saying, and I mean like most people I've seen comment on this card, have said some form of, you immediately get a 2-for-1 when you swing in with it. And I don't know if that's true, because yeah, like they lose a goat, but they didn't have the goats to begin with. You gave them 3 goats. So it's actually a few turns before you're really 2-for-1ing them. Like, it's technically a 2-for-1. You're taking a body off their side of the battlefield, you're drawing a card. Sounds like a 2-for-1, but again, like they wouldn't have had the goats if you hadn't played the troll in the first place. So it doesn't really feel like a 2-for-1. But at the same time, there's just not really that much removal in Standard right now that cleanly takes this out. So if it does slowly whittle down your opponent's goats or something, then it's going to become a really formidable threat before too long. Likewise, you could just like Cry of the Carnarium or Ritual of Soot or something, because this dodges Ritual of Soot, but the goats don't, and just take out all of your opponent's guys and start swinging in with a troll. That seems like the better way to play the card, probably. You could also play like the whatever creature type you want gets -3/-3, take out all their goats, and then make them actually start sacrificing creatures when you swing in. I do like that even though you have to tap it down when they sack a creature, you gain life, you draw a card. Like, all this is really good, but at the same time, I think you're giving your opponent an awful long time to find an answer to this, and I'm not really sure how good this is going to be against a majority of decks in the format that are either mid-range decks equipped with a lot of good removal, or control decks equipped with a lot of good removal. So I'm just not sure how I feel about this. Again, the 5-drop slot is really crowded with a lot of really good options right now, and I'm not quite sure this cuts the mustard. Up next, I think I'll do Hypnotic Sprite, which sounds like a good drink. Hypnotic and Sprite mixed together, delicious. But anyway, it's 2 blue for a flying 2/1 fairy. But that's not the exciting part. The exciting part is Mesmeric Glare. It's 3 mana, 2 and a blue for an instant. Counter target spell with converted mana cost 3 or less. That's a hot card right there, kids. That's fine. Like, it's kind of like a Spell Stutter Sprite. I really wish that the casting costs were inverted on this, were reversed, but that would probably be, that'd be too good, right? That'd be too good. I will say, though, that especially when you're on the play, this is going to be very good against Teferi and everything else below it on the curve, you know, or at its same mark. You know, I've seen a lot of people say it's something to the effect of, like, what I just said, you have to be on the play for this to be good, but not necessarily. There are going to be a lot of decks that cast, 3 mana and under cards on turns well past turn 3. I mean, most decks, most of their curve lies at 3 and under. So, I mean, you can counter stuff with this on turn 7. It really, you know what I mean? Like, especially against aggro decks that are going to be almost entirely low curve, Feather and the like, for instance. This is going to have relevance pretty much the entire game while it's in your hand as a counterspell. So I like that about it, but once you have countered something, you kind of do get it. Again, this is kind of a 2-for-1 a little bit, because you'll get rid of that spell that's on the stack, one of the best creatures in their deck possibly, or maybe they're Teferi or whatever, and then you also get a 2-1 flyer, which is kind of nothing to sneeze at. I mean, it's not going to finish the game off by itself, but it will contribute an awful lot. So I like an awful lot about this. It might go in the Simic Flash deck. It might go in Bant decks that play a fair amount of creatures but are still control decks. I just like so much about this, and even though I'm not sure it sees much play out of Standard, it definitely could. This could see some Modern play, but I highly doubt it. This looks like a Standard card, but in that capacity, the card has a lot of playability. But up next, let's look at Outlaws Merryman here. This is 4 mana, 1 a red and 2 white for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose 1 at random. I think that the words "at random" just murder this card. Create a red and white creature token with those characteristics. Mode 1 is a 3/1 human warrior with trample and haste. Mode 2 is a 2/1 human cleric with lifelink and haste. And then Mode 3 is a 1/2 human rogue with haste, and when this creature ETBs, it deals a damage to any target. Now, if you could choose the mode on this, I think it would be a much more powerful card, but it almost strikes me as the kind of card that at first, when it was first designed, you could choose the mode, and that proved to be way too powerful, depending on the situation. So I can understand adding the words at random, but again, I really think it takes a lot of the playability off of this. But all that said, getting a free creature guaranteed every single turn is very good. It really kind of doesn't matter what creature you're getting, but obviously against aggro you want the lifelink. Against control decks you often want the 3/1 with trample and haste, but sometimes you'll want the guaranteed damage every turn and a guaranteed spectacle trigger too. But alas, you can't choose which one you want, so choosing at random is kind of, again, that just really hurts my opinion on this card. But I'll say it one more time. Getting a free creature every single turn that's fine, but you'll have to, this takes up the 4-drop slot in your deck, or at least a few of the 4-drop slots in your deck, and it doesn't do anything until your next turn. Again, a do-nothing enchantment for 4 mana. It's just asking an awful lot. It really is. And you can get the wrong creature 2 or 3 times in a row if you're particularly unlucky. And I just don't usually like things that leave things up to random chance. This is the bad kind of random. We saw the good instance of random discard earlier on that ogre at the beginning of the video. This is the bad kind of random that you don't want. So I can't really say that I like it, but again, you get a creature. You just get one every turn. That's probably decent. Speaking of extra creatures, here's Worthy Knight right here. It's 1 and a white for a 2/2 human knight, and whenever you cast a knight spell, you create a 1/1 white human creature token. This is good. Probably really good. It's like a Hero Precinct 1 that works with only knights, but if you're casting nothing but knights, then good Knight. I thought over that pun halfway through, and I was like, do I really want to pull the trigger on this pun? Yeah, I might as well. I've already stepped in it. Might as well do it. But anyway, it was dumb. We were all there. But I think this is fine because the Knight's deck is shaping up. We've got a 2-mana Lord right now. We've also got Corpse Knight. And along with this, that really crowds the 2-drop slot. But those are all desirable 2-drops for the Knight's deck. We've also got a land that allows us to play Knights as a creature type way more easily. And a couple of other decent Knights, especially in Historic. The Historic format, Knights looks really good. Like History of Benalia and a couple of other things you can play. Look fantastic for the Knight's deck. But I want to try to make it work in Standard. And this is one of the cards that makes me most want to make that deck work. Extra creatures are great all the time, right? But especially in a deck that's trying to take advantage of Embercleave as much as possible, you really need a board full of creatures, and this is going to give you that. If you can just play, you know, a night the next turn, and then 2 nights the turn after that. You're just getting so much production out of this. You're forcing sweepers. And if Knights, you know, Knights needed another good 2-drop. I did just say that we're getting kind of crowded at the 2-drop slot, but it needed one more. It needed 3 decent 2-drops, and I think this is exactly what they were waiting for. So again, every day that deck looks better and better. But today was a day of hot 2-drops. We'll get to those a little bit later, but I got a couple of big things I want to cover real quick, like Lochmere Serpent. We got our Loch Ness Monster today, which I think is really neat because Nezahal, going out of the format, everybody called it Nezzy because it kind of sounds like Nessie. No, we actually just get Nessie. But this is 6 mana, 4, a blue, and a black for a 7/7 Serpent with Flash. Yay. You can also pay a blue and sack an island, and it can't be blocked this turn. That's pretty nice. You can pay black and sack a swamp, and you gain 1 life and you draw a card. That is also very nice. Or there's more. You can pay a blue and a black and exile 5 target cards from an opponent's graveyard to return Serpent from your graveyard to your hand. You can only do that anytime you get cast a sorcery. This is a beautiful control finisher. I like this a lot. Your opponent's going to have to exile this to like really effectively deal with it, or just have no cards in their graveyard. That's another way to effectively deal with it, but it seems a lot more likely that they're going to have to just exile this. So break out your Prison Realms and your Conclave Tribunals and stuff, and I guess your Lava Coils if you want a 2-for-1 yourself, like Lava Coil Lightning Strike if they reprint it or something. We'll take care of this, but at the same time, it is really going to be a lot more difficult to exile things in a format where Vraska's Contempt doesn't exist anymore, for instance. So exile is going to, and Ixalan's Binding won't exist. There's going to be just fewer ways to exile stuff in the upcoming format. Even if there still are a few ways, it's going to be a little bit tougher. So things like this look more and more relevant. Plus, being able to just sack a swamp to draw a card, yeah, I guess you're getting a life too, but drawing the card is what I'm really interested in here. That seems very good, especially if they are looking to kill Serpent or something. You can just sack a swamp or 2 in response, draw cards until you get a counterspell, whatever. That's one way of going about it, but once you do have it in play, you can also just sack islands to finish the game off in like 3 bites. It's just a perfect control finisher. I like so much about this. It's resilient. It's got the flash, so you don't really ever have to spend mana on it. You don't want to spend. You can sacrifice things, EOT, sacrifice swamps, EOT to draw extra cards. You can sacrifice the extra islands you're bound to have. I mean, it's a control finisher. In the very late game, you're going to have tons and tons of extra lands. Sacrificing lands to do stuff on this card is so much more powerful than it might look. I'm telling you. The card is unbelievable. But speaking of big, unkillable 6-mana guys, here's Feasting Troll King. FTK is 6 mana and 4 of it's green for a 7/6 Troll Noble with Vigilance and Trample. And when it ETBs, if you cast it from your hand, you create 3 food tokens. If you sacrifice 3 food tokens, you can return FTK from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate this ability only during your turn. Okay, so this is meant to be a replacement for Carnage Tyrant, and it is way more fair than Carnage Tyrant. It doesn't have the hexproof or anything, but if they do kill it, it's fairly easy to bring it back. It's got a built-in way when you first cast it of bringing it back from death at least the one time. And if you got any other food token generating things in your deck, then it's somewhat likely you'll be able to bring this back at least a second time. And again, if your opponent can't exile things, and it's going to be at least slightly harder to exile things in the next format, then this thing just looks fantastic. This is a really good card. And by the way, note that it effectively just gains you 9 life. Like, you have to pay its casting cost again incrementally, but it can gain you up to 9 life as well, and that's really swingy against aggro decks. So a lot I like about this card too. Not quite the control finisher that Nessie is or anything, but still a really powerful card for green ramp decks, and it's going to be way easier to get that 2 green than you think, just in a Nissa deck or something like that, or decks that play mana dorks like Paradise Druid, Leafkin Druid, which can tap for 2 green. It's going to be very easy to cast this card both ahead of schedule and for the proper mana costs. So, y'all. Again, food is looking better and better every day, but I'm not quite ready to say it's a great deck. That said, this probably goes in decks outside of strictly just food-based decks as like a really nice ramp target that's very difficult to deal with finality. But we're getting down to the wire. We've got 3 cards left today, so what are the 3 best cards of the day? Well, they're all 2-drop creatures. It's really a day of insane 2-drops in just about every color, but I'll start on Wildborn Preserver here. But honestly, these last 3 cards are in like no particular order. These are all just insanely balls out, bonkers, banana boat 2-drops, and I just want to state that like the last one I cover isn't necessarily the best card of the day. So let me go ahead and talk about Preserver here. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 2/2 elf archer with flash and reach, because archers have reach. That's going to matter later. We'll talk about it. And whenever another non-human creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay X. When you do, put X +1/+1 counters on Preserver. Well played. WP indeed, the initials. I'm supposed to be better with words than this, but anyway, the card just looks crazy. Like, imagine this in Cynic Flash, which is like the obvious home for it. We need to replace Merfolk Trickster and a couple of other creatures that are rotating out. And this just looks like exactly the thing you need. It looks better than just about any creature the deck already plays, aside from maybe Ambusher and possibly Frilled Mystic. But this looks so freaking good, you know? You play this with Flash, and you can play it as like a Flash blocker with Reach or something if you want to play it that way, so it's kind of removal in that manner, and that's pretty good. That's a decent like floor for the card, but if it gets to stay in play for more than a turn or so, then it's just going to get righteously huge. You know, you play at EOT, and then you have your turn, you say go, and then when your opponent tries to swing in, you just play Brineborn Cutthroat, put an extra couple of power on this thing, block, swing the game. It just looks so dangerous. And note, too, that if you have enough mana, then you can just make this big all at once, you know. Play this and then maybe play a Spectral Sailor on the same EOT, like the same end of turn step. And if you just dump all your extra mana into this in the relative late game, and suddenly you went from like no board to a Spectral Sailor and like a 5 or 6 power Preserver, all at EOT. Like, this looks like a decent top deck too for the Simic Flash deck, and just about any deck, honestly, because if you just wait until you have like another creature in your hand, then you just flash this in during your opponent's end step, and then when you go, you play the other creature in your hand, and suddenly it would, I have a 7 power Preserver. That weird, that's crazy. This just looks so good, and it is relatively easy to take out with like Shock or Disfigure and other removal spells, and they can just like respond to the trigger going on the stack by shocking it or something. Like, there are definitely ways to keep the card in check, but if it ever even gets to trigger and actually lives through it just once, then it just becomes this crazy 2-drop. It's just, I love 2-drops that are decent on their own, and honestly, a 2-mana 2/2 Flash Reach is decent stats on its own. That's a good bear. But when you throw in, you know, over the course of a game, this can get to 20 power, you know? I mean, you play one creature and it gets to 4 power. You play another creature and it gets to 7 power. You play another creature and it gets to 12 power or whatever, depending on how much mana you have left over. It's just a crazy looking thing to me, and I really can't overstate how good this card looks. That said, it is the third to last card I chose to talk about. So there's obviously stuff today that I think is worth talking about more than that. Again, these are kind of in no particular order, but just a card that I think people are getting a lot more hype about than that one is Robber of the Rich. This is probably like the most hyped card of the day because it's Robin Hood, you know? People are pretty excited about that, but it bothers me so much that Robin Hood is red. Robin Hood should probably be green. Probably. I mean, I guess there's the argument, we could talk about that for an hour, but let's not. Let's talk about the function of the card. Robber of the Rich is 2 mana, 1 and a red for a 2/2 human archer rogue with reach and haste, and it has reach because it's an archer. One of the number one things I've seen people talk about with this card is not how amazing this text box is, but like, why does it have reach? That's weird, it's red. It's got reach. I don't get it. It's an archer. Robin Hood's an archer. Archers have reach. Anyway, whenever Robber of the Rich attacks, if defending player has more cards in hand than you exile the top card of their library. During any turn that you attacked with a rogue, not specifically Robber of the Rich, but any rogue, you may cast that card, and you may spend mana as though it were any mana to cast that spell. That's delightful. It's just so good. Like, on stats alone, just like the last creature, a 2 mana 2/2 haste reach, that's pretty decent stats, kid. I don't mind that at all right there, but the fact that this is going to get you a card advantage over the course of a game on a 2-drop, almost always good. Pretty much always good. It's not Dark Confidant or anything, but if you want to compare this to any creature, I compare it to like Glint Sleeve Siphoner. It's a lot like that. It doesn't even have to get 3 for combat damage, much like Glint Sleeve Siphoner. to be honest. I mean, this is going to draw you a card a good bit, and sometimes it'll just throw itself into combat knowing it's going to die to draw you that card. And yeah, it's not really a drawn card. You exile. It's the red drawing a card they've been doing for the last couple of years. But it's still an effective card advantage engine. And against control decks that might not have any real way to deal with this until they land the sweeper on turn 4 or whatever, it's just going to draw you like at least 2 cards that game. And sometimes that's really all that's going to be needed. It's just absolutely crazy to see this kind of card advantage on a 2-drop, and it doesn't even have to get in for combat damage. Just take note, this is easily one of the best cards of the day, hands down. But we made it, everybody. Final card of the day. What's it going to be? It's Charming Prince, not Prince Charming, because again, you want to, when in doubt, err on the side of not infringing copyright law. So, yeah, Charming Prince. But it's still a cute name, because in Magic, the Gathering, which is the game that we play, it turns out that all charms have 3 modes on them. So, of course, Charming Prince has 3 modes. That is very cute, Wizards. I see you. I see you. This is 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 2/2 human noble. And when it ETBs, you choose one. You either scry 2, or you gain 3 life, or, the fun one, you exile another target creature that you own. Return it to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. First of all, Prince Charming looks kind of like the boyfriend from The Devil Wears Prada. To me, he's a little lighter, but that looks like Nick to me. Is his name Nick? That's right. His name's Nick. Anyway, this is a very good Magic card. I don't know if you've noticed. I do think this ends up seeing play in Standard. Today, most of the conversation has been centered around how good this is in Modern, and it is. It's very good in Modern Humans. It's very good in Modern Soul Herder. It's exactly the kind of thing Soul Herder has been waiting on. So, wait till you see this card in Modern. That's a thing, kids, but that's not something that I know enough about to discuss, other than like it goes in Modern Humans and it goes in Soul Herder and probably a couple of other. I mean, just look, this is a good Modern 2-drop, right? That on its face, that's good. But this probably goes in Standard too. First of all, let's go through the modes. Scry 2, not the best mode. It's kind of like a Fat Omen speaker or something, but it's still like a Fat Omen speaker. It's not terrible. This will help fix your lands and stuff. You know, if you started on a 2-lander or something, it'll help you get that 3rd or maybe even 4th land that you need, or just help you scry into business. I mean, what's wrong with that? You know, Scry 2 is at least decent, but getting 3 life will help you not only in those life gain decks with your Johnny's Pride mates and your Bloodthirsty Aerialists and blah, 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 but it'll just help you in the aggro matchups. You know, gaining 3 life and putting a body on the battlefield on turn 2 doesn't just like end aggro's game or anything, but it's definitely a huge step in the right direction. But as far as this last ability, note that it's not like an immediate blink. It doesn't just exile the creature and it comes right back. You have to wait till the end of turn. So it's a lot. You can do fewer tricks with it than you think it looks like you can do, but it's still a desirable card. There's a lot of blinkable creatures in Standard right now, and a lot of them are the same colors, you know, or at least one of the same colors. Like, if you want to blink your Elite Guard Mage, that seems good. If you want to blink a Basilica Bellhunt, that also seems very nice. But even if you don't have another creature out that you can flicker and do fun stuff with, there's still 2 modes on there that are really, really useful. Never underestimate how good 3 subpar modes are when they're mashed together on the same card and you get the choice of them. That's something else that I've seen a lot today is people like, I don't really get it. None of these modes look particularly good on their own. Yeah, that's the thing with modal cards, is the ability to make a choice, the ability to be versatile, the ability to fit whatever situation the game state is currently at is very important and always makes for a very powerful card. Charms are powerful, so I imagine that a charm on a body is just crazy, especially at this low of a cost. Like, it's one of the better bears that I've seen in a while, and that's saying something considering how many bears we saw just today that are just like unfathomably good looking Magic cards. So today was a day of relevance in the 2-drop slot, and we really needed that for a few different colors. I'm still hoping that we see a really, really good black 2-drop. Well, hopefully we'll get there. But in just about every other color today, we saw, save for blue, we saw a very nasty 2-drop. But that'll finish it off, it turns out. That was all the cards for Tuesday, but there's probably going to be some more cards on Wednesday. That's how spoiler season works. So make sure you subscribe to the channel with the bell for notifications so you know when we put our spoiler videos out. You want to be up to date on that content. And like this video too if you enjoyed it. I imagine if you're still here, you liked it. So, you know, just take like an extra 0.5, it's not even a whole second out of your day. It's going to take me longer to explain to you how to hit the like button than it does to actually hit the like button. You can hit the like button like 18 times in the middle of me doing the screed about the like button. And now you're annoyed enough that you've already clicked away from the video. And I apologize for that. But just in case you are still here, check out the Patreon if you want to support this content. Help me keep doing what I'm doing because I really enjoy doing it for you. And yeah, if you want to kick in, all I really ask is $1 a month. And once Throne of Eldraine season starts kicking around here, you'll be able to pick what decks you want to see first. So, $1 a month is a pretty good investment. I feel like I'm worth it, I gotta say. So, anyway, I think I'm done for this one, though. If you want to pre-order any of this stuff, you can check out the first link in the description and go over to TCG Player. They're a good price guide. Even if you're not going to order anything, just click the link so you know what these cards are going for right now. And now I'm done. Okay, I think that's it. So I guess I'll catch you cats later. Let me know how y'all felt about these in the sideboard down there, the old comments, the ye old YouTube comments section. Let me know how you felt about these and how my analysis of them is just way off, because I'm sure that's what people really like to do down there. So knock yourselves out down there in the comments section, and I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.